As SpaceX gears up for Starship Flight 12 and the debut of version 3, teams are at long last nearing completion of Pad 2. Meanwhile, here on the Space Coast, some major hardware has arrived at LC-39A's Starship facility, in addition to signs that Space Launch Complex 37's construction is finally about to commence. All of these facilities will definitely come in handy to launch the thousands of ships that Elon aims to produce yearly, up to 10,000 annually per his recent X post. Of course, we'll be covering all of that and more on this week's Starbase update. Let's begin over at Pad 2 from the intro because, oh man, there has been some serious progress this week. First and foremost, let's go ahead with the big ticket item. Pad 2 is armed and ready, pun intended there, because its ship quick disconnect arm is finally complete. Well, at least structurally. For the last few months, we have been closely tracking the assembly and construction of the ship quick disconnect arm for Pad 2. Just like on Tower 1, it's made of two sections: the shoulder, which connects all required plumbing to the tower itself, and the forearm, which has the actual ship quick disconnect port that interfaces with the ship. The shoulder section was installed over a month ago now, and the forearm is what rolled to the pad earlier this week before being lifted and installed. While Tower 2's arm was built in two parts and has a similar shape to Pad 1's, that's about where the similarities end. This arm introduces a ton of changes, especially in terms of protecting hardware and also having access to them. The plumbing, for example, rather than passing through the inside of the arm, it's on top with a walkway allowing access to all of its hardware. The forearm section is also a lot cleaner in design, as much of the control equipment formerly located here on Pad 1 has been relocated to the shoulder. Pad 1's SQD arm also had the old claw mechanism many years back. It was moved into place and attached to the booster lift points to provide stability for the whole stack. This was only used once back in February of 2022. Even though it's long gone, some hardware still remains. Apart from that, the placement of the QD port was also adjusted to accommodate the extra height gained from the hot staging ring on Super Heavy boosters, first used during Flight 2. In contrast, Tower 2's forearm is much cleaner as it doesn't have the claw mechanism and its umbilical is mounted more in parallel with it. In fact, the SQD arm is mounted slightly lower on Tower 2 than Tower 1 because the full stack sits a little bit lower than previous. You can thank the brand new launch mount design for that. This hopefully means less rework in between launches and more protection for the hardware involved, and easier access not just to the arm itself, but also to the ship's aft section. However, SQD progress wasn't exactly limited to just Starbase this week. Here on the Space Coast, teams rolled out the shoulder section of the ship quick disconnect arm for Starship's launch facility at historic Launch Complex 39A. This happened last Tuesday night at the Kennedy Space Center, rolling down from the Roberts Road facility where it was assembled. What's particularly interesting though is that it was originally built several years ago when SpaceX first began construction at 39A. At the time, it was designed and built similarly to Pad 1, but was then left untouched at Roberts Road for an extended period of time as SpaceX paused Starship-related construction in Florida to focus on Starbase. Work picked up again in 2024, and last year, SpaceX relocated it underneath the rolling tent where they had built 39A's launch mount. During its time there, it was stripped of the older hardware and later modified with the newer design, just like Pad 2. The forearm is still missing though, but if the timeline here is anything like that of Pad 2, we should see it rolling out for installation in a little over 1 month from now. Keep in mind though, that Starship is expanding beyond 39A here. There is a lot to catch up on at Space Launch Complex 37 as well. This week, the FAA released OEAAA filings from SpaceX regarding the launch tower construction and the use of cranes here. For those that may not be familiar, OEAAA stands for Obstruction Evaluation and Airport Airspace Analysis, which is filed normally when an entity aims to construct something that may disrupt airspace and aerial traffic due to its height. 3 filings were released, covering the launch tower itself, an LR-11,000 crane, and the behemoth LR-13,000 crane, which was used at LC-39A to lift its launch mount. We assume that the LR-11,000 referred to in the filings is the same one currently in use at 39A, and that it'll be moved to 37 once its work there is finished. But there is a possibility that this is a separate crane that'll show up later down the line, but we'll have to wait and see. Interestingly, this documentation shows the actual coordinates for the cranes and the launch tower's locations, and well, they're in a completely different spot than previously mentioned in release paperwork. For example, as part of the environmental review process, SpaceX proposed proposed 2 launch pads within 37, and in the map shown in the proposal, both of them were located on the eastern side of the complex, one pad on the northeast corner and the other on the southeast corner. All of the ground support equipment would end up being located on the west side of the pad then as well. Here though, the first launch pad is now on the northwest corner, sort of in the same general area where Space Launch Complex 37A was once built. 37 used to be 37A and B many years ago. And, well, I guess still was, but it was just never called that. Thanks to satellite imagery acquired by our friend Harry Stranger, we can view the ongoing work at Slick 37 from a top-down perspective. They show the hardware for the LR-13000 crane now sitting on the northwest corner of the complex, in addition to a large area to the south having been graded. That area in particular may end up being dedicated to ground support equipment such as the propellant tank farm, subcoolers, and cryogenic pumps. SpaceX has also further altered the site to add a pond on the eastern side of the complex, likely to compensate for the one lost, making room for the brand new launch towers. According to documentation, work on that first new tower could begin as soon as January 23rd, less than 2 weeks from now. If you've been following along in previous Starbase updates and Space Coast updates, you're probably already aware that SpaceX already has 9 tower sections built at the Roberts Road facility. This means that once the foundations are in place and the supporting base is built, rollout and stacking of these sections may commence. The skyline here on the Space Coast will soon be changing once again, and as always, we'll be right here to follow along. Now, circling back for a second in the aforementioned satellite imagery, we can see a lot of progress on the LC-39A Starship tank farm and ground systems. The tanks delivered in recent weeks are now installed, with a few subcoolers in place alongside the cryogenic pumps. A solid amount of the underground plumbing for propellants and the deluge system have been covered, likely indicating that those areas are now being closed out, or have been already. Visible from above is the ongoing work on the launch mount and the flame trench area as well, where teams still have plenty of work to do. So, work continues on the orbital launch mount. Let's circle back to Pad 2 and Starbase for a bit again, because there's a bit more work to talk about than just on the SQD. The tower has received other important additions, such as the chill down vent. This is what is used to vent gaseous oxygen, or GOX, during chill down of the liquid oxygen line that goes up the ship QD arm. This is a procedure that we see all the time with Falcon 9, you know, the big T-minus 20-minute vent and all. But we've also seen it in action at Pad 1 plenty of times at this point as well, not just for launches, but tanking tests and wet dress rehearsals as well. Interestingly, the vent on Tower 2 has 3 separate outlets instead of the one at Tower 1. It's kind of weird, almost like Neptune's spear, I guess? But recall the tri-vent from ship back in the SN era, because it could kind of also look like that. Maybe kinda, sorta, not really, I don't know. The chopstick arms also got some new hardware this week. In particular, SpaceX installed a set of bumper assemblies on the end of the arms, extending the bumper area of the chopsticks beyond the actual landing rail itself. This might be to protect the end of the sticks in case a ship or booster ends up closer to the edge, protecting both the vehicle and the stick hardware simultaneously. These were hopefully the last major additions to the chopsticks, but you never know. They have been pretty busy upgrading the system as a whole in the last few weeks, but from what we can tell, there doesn't seem like there's much left to do. Down on the launch mount, SpaceX teams have completed the installation of all of the hold-down arms protective doors. These shield the hold-down arms once closed, preventing the exhaust of 33 Raptor 3 engines from damaging them during liftoff. There are 20 hold-down arms and subsequent doors in total, each connected to the actual retraction system, which is incredibly complex itself. All of this being said, unless there's something we perhaps missed, these additions to Pad 2 should theoretically be the last. Now, I'm sure there's some plumbing here and there and connections to be finished, etc., but overall, Pad 2 is just about finished. This puts it on track for booster testing readiness whenever Booster 19 completes its cryogenic test campaign and receives its 33 Raptor engines. We should see further testing of the ground systems prior to any vehicles arriving here though, especially now since they're connecting all ship QD hardware to them. I'd recommend keeping an eye on Starbase Live honestly, because testing here could happen at any time. Over at Pad 1, crews continue to work on different areas to adapt to Pad 2's design. Demolition of the old launch mount and water-cooled steel plate have been non-stop since the Flight 11 campaign concluded 3 months ago. Good God, it's been 3 months already. Well now, demolition work seems to be almost finished. All diggers have left the site as of recording, and all that's left to break apart is the foundation and sheet piles that were installed for the steel plate. Soon enough, SpaceX should be able to start work on the foundations of the new flame trench and launch mount. At the tower base, we've also seen crews removing steel protection covers used to shield the plumbing that was there in between the tank farm and the tower. Unlike Tower 2 or 39A's, the tower at Pad 1 was placed directly in front of the tank farm, meaning that all really delicate hardware was located right next to the actual launch mount and were either subsequently placed underground or beneath steel shielding. This is much simpler at Pad 2 and in Florida because the tower itself shields that hardware from the forces of launch. Plans released in August highlighted the desire to extend the launch site southward, so it would make sense for SpaceX to relocate all necessary plumbing to the rear of the tower as well. This area actually used to be where the old water deluge system was located, but now it's just about all been removed. Another 2 deluge tanks left Starbase this week, adding to the list of hardware removed from Pad 1. Alright, now I get it, that's a lot of dialogue just for launch pads, so you're probably thinking, that's great and all, but what's up with the next Starship launch? And, honestly, that's kind of a fair point. So let's go ahead and dive into how things are looking this week compared to last regarding Flight 12 readiness. First, we have Ship 39, still inside of Mega Bay 2. Last week, we mentioned that crews had installed a massive set of scaffolding around it, and that it may be related to heat shield tile work going on with Ship 40 inside Starfactory. And it wasn't exactly confidence-inspiring either. But, as of recording, 39 scaffolding has started to come down as we noticed this past Sunday morning. Now, we were led to think that this work was isolated to the actual nose cone section, and upon further inspection, there were noticeable spots where tiles were perhaps drilled into and modified. As we said last week, we're not entirely sure why this happened, but it looks to be finished by about now, edging Ship 39 ever closer to its long-awaited cryo-proof testing campaign at Massey's. It's full steam ahead right now for a version 3 debut in March. Well, hopefully. But even if Ship 39 wasn't encompassed by all that scaffolding, it would have to wait because the S39.1 test tank has stolen the thrust simulator test stand at Massey's. Rude. This is the test tank that SpaceX has been using to verify the brand new design of version 3 Starship's aft section. It had returned back to the Starfactory a few weeks ago after its initial round of testing at Massey's. Earlier this week though, it once again emerged from Starfactory, went into Mega Bay 2, and was installed on the ship thrust simulator stand. It had a few key differences compared to when we last saw it. For starters, SpaceX installed one of the docking port enclosures that protect the hardware for a ship-to-ship docking. They've also added hoop stiffeners over the skirt vents, in addition to hardware with the ship's raceway. Extra reinforcements were also spotted around the ship quick disconnect as well, which also seems like it has some extra ports that weren't present before. It's entirely possible that these late additions were a result of previous testing, and they have to go back out again for further testing and validation. So, from the looks of things, Ship 39 may not depart for cryogenic-proof testing until all of this test tank madness concludes and its thrust simulator stand returns to the production site. Even once Ship 39 completes its cryogenic-proof test campaign, it'll have to return to Massey's again to perform engine testing at the static fire stand, which is still under renovation. SpaceX has been installing a new truss structure where this stand is located, and we're still kind of unsure of its purpose. But in the past week, more hardware has been installed, particularly at the top, which seems to now have some sort of platform. A new set of stairs is also being erected on one side, likely to give workers access to said platform. As we normally say, we should have a much better idea of what its purpose is in due time. We also got to see more hardware arriving for the second static fire stand this week, a stand that SpaceX has been constructing now for quite a while. The first will still be used, of course, but it's not exactly in the critical path for Flight 12. But it's still neat to see nonetheless. So Ship 39 still has some more work to go, but what about Booster? Well, if Booster 19 had followed 18's timeline, it should have already rolled out to Massey's for cryo testing, something we covered in last week's episode. It's possible that SpaceX is taking some extra time and precaution to make sure that everything is properly buttoned up, as they cannot afford a mistake like 18 again. A hint that Booster 19's rollout may be soon is when we see the booster thrust simulator stand heading into Mega Bay 1, so that 19 can be installed onto it. Hopefully that happens soon though, or otherwise the chances of launching in the first quarter of 2026, which is SpaceX's current goal, begin declining. Even then, as mentioned before, Ship 39 testing needs to be done. There's also the added possibility that Flight 12 may have to wait for both the B18.1 and B18.3 test tank data before processing. And speaking of, this week we saw one more test of B18.1, validating the booster aft section and internal landing tank's new designs. The last time it had undergone any testing was about a month ago, back in mid-December. Even so, they don't seem to be finished with it for now. On the other hand, B18.3 hasn't seen any testing since they installed the mock ship skirt on top of it, but that will hopefully change soon. This past week, SpaceX installed the structural test stand cap following the removal and reinstallation of the ship skirt just a few days earlier. This moves the B-18.3 test tank one step closer to testing completion, hopefully validating the new hot staging truss design and booster forward dome section. SpaceX may launch Flight 12 without strictly completing all testing on B-18.1 and B-18.3 and fly with the data that they already have. But on the other hand, that may not be the case here at all, which means that this testing directly contributes into the pre-launch timeline. So keep a very close eye on it. Now, of course, Flight 12 is just the first step in the long road towards SpaceX's targeted flight cadence with Starship going forward. Components for future ships are lined up inside Starfactory as their line of production continues to roll. The most visible area of production are ship nose cones right next to the glass windows on Highway 4. Last week we mentioned how SpaceX had drilled into the tiles for Ship 40's nose cone, and as of recording, these tiles have yet to actually be removed. However, we've since noticed even more tiles being drilled into, especially on the forward flaps and aero covers. We originally thought that the drilling was isolated to one area of the nose cone, but this proves otherwise, meaning that there could still be tiles left to be worked on. We've also thought before that drilling in general meant the imminent removal of the tiles themselves, but it's been more than 3 weeks since we first noticed it, and none have since been removed. You would think that they would have been removed by now, considering the time that's passed. Maybe removal wasn't even their intention to begin with. Perhaps they came across a problem and found a solution that involved keeping the tiles in place for repairs, or maybe it's a design modification to be tested in flight. It's all speculation at this point, but hopefully we'll find out more from SpaceX in the future, maybe during the Flight 12 livestream or a press release before then. Please be the latter. To this point, Ship 40's nose cone is the only one we've seen drilling on, at least those with tiles installed, including Ship 41 and Ship 42, but we'll be keeping eyes on. Do you guys have any ideas? Let us know in the comment section down below. The other nose cones haven't exactly morphed that much beyond Ship 43. This one in particular was moved from the methane header tank installation stand over to the workstation next to Ship 42. We should be seeing it relocated for tile pin installation soon in order to receive its own tiles. Any and all ship and booster production will have to expand massively at some point. Just last year, SpaceX stated the goal of producing 1,000 ships per year, but this week, Elon posted on X, quote, maybe as high as 10,000 ships per year. And, well, honestly, that's a ship every 68 minutes, which would dwarf global jet aircraft production, which is the closest analog here for large flying vehicles. The timeline at this point is unclear, but it's definitely aggressive, which would demand huge infrastructure, raw materials, tooling, workforce, transport, and of course coffee for all the engineers and technicians. Expect mega Starbase expansion beyond what's already taking place, and factories across the US or even the world. Now keep in mind, they're already building gigabays both at Starbase and here at the Kennedy Space Center, each of which are capable of processing 24 vehicles each, so further sites are likely needed. At that scale, maybe it's a good idea to store ships in orbit for reuse perhaps. And to launch that many ships anyway? I mean, it's just straight up off the charts. Even some quick math blows well past the current scales of what we're seeing now. Upping from 1,000 to 10,000 ships yearly shows SpaceX's bold vision for space utilization, perhaps driven by the ever so popular topic these days of AI in space data centers. What this means though is that the 29 tests that we've had at McGregor this week will pale in comparison to future Raptor testing operations. And yes, that is our segue for this week's McGregor Minute. It's been a really active week this time around here, and we've finally seen the return of the Raptor South stand. On January 7th, SpaceX carried out a 20-second test there, being the first there since December 10th. Despite coming back online, both Raptor North and South stands are still being worked on and receiving upgrades. On the 5th, we saw a new vertical tank being installed at Raptor North. Then on the 8th, 2 new horizontal tanks arrived at McGregor and are most likely going towards either of them as well. So even though they're back online, the majority of those 29 tests that we saw were once again from the Raptor vertical stand, which has seen even further relight testing. As usual for the last few weeks as well, we've also seen more Raptor 2 engines passing by our McGregor live cameras, likely heading out for scrapping based on the state of some of them. And honestly, it's not like they're exactly useful nowadays anyway. We also spotted another Raptor 3 RVAC engine removed from the Raptor South stand, but we're not entirely sure if this was the same one as last time, which was serial number 77. It could be another. From the footage we have, it's not easily legible because of the distance. What is certain though is that we cannot wait to see all 3 of them firing on ship while in space on ascent. Hopefully all goes well in the coming weeks for Ship 39, Booster 19, and the many test tanks awaiting their results, and Flight 12 can get off the ground as soon as possible. And with that folks, that is going to wrap up this week's episode of Starbase Update. We'll be back next week as always with more progress here, as it is absolutely relentless. I'm Max Evans for NSF. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.